thanks very much for coming. These series of training and social sessions have been fairly successful so far, and hopefully they'll continue into the future. We'll be coming up with the schedule of the next 6 to 7 months. In a short while we're sending that out and trying to get more people involved, both external and internal. But for tonight's session we have Colman Duggan for community researching about news and current affairs in the community. I won't say too much more, only Colman has been with us for about, was it 3 years or 4 years now?
Third year.
Third year.
2.5 years.
On D15 today, so he has a good bit of time under his belt on that programme, and has talked about this before for us at another event. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Colman.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, presume there's no Whistling Floors present. They're all in the gallery up to the lecture house. Mr. Shaffer answer his questions. He hasn't changed it. I'll blow that whistle. I knew him before he was famous, and he hasn't changed his thoughts. He's very consistent. Okay, so research and current affairs in Phoenix, 92.5 FM. So that's research and current affairs in Phoenix. That's what I was asked to talk about. So not news as such, but current affairs, and I suppose the show that Rachel and Jim and myself are involved with is the D15 show on a Thursday. I've been doing that now since daytime. It started in Phoenix in May 2011. And so current affairs. So when I think about current affairs, I think of international current affairs, national current affairs, and what about local? Well, in the same way that Tip O'Neill, the late Speaker of the US House of Representatives, said all politics is local, and that's now entered the lexicon of everyday conversation, it can equally be said, I think, that current affairs are local, because they're local to where they're happening. In other words, whether it's about whistleblowers and whether the Gardaí are good on Sundays, they're bad on Fridays, and they're with their mothers on Saturdays, whatever it is, wherever it's happening, whether it's in Syria or whether it's in Blanchardstown, really, it's something about what's happening in a either worldwide or internationally or in the local area. And so many of, I suppose, current affairs do happen in small places. They don't all happen at the United Nations building in New York. They're of interest because of where they're happening, but also they're of interest because they engage our curiosity wherever we happen to be. So if we pay attention to what's going on in the world, as they say, then really it really doesn't matter if it's a village in India, if it's a metropolis in Spain, if it's what some Garda did or didn't do in Donegal or Cavan or Cork. It's what really engages our interest, what engages our curiosity, whether we're listeners or whether we are in storytelling, because I guess that's what a lot of radio is about. In radio, then, we're concerned with what's happening now, right this minute, or at least in the current times, recent days, recent weeks, or recent months at most. Sometimes we're interested in the recent past, or as I suppose all this thing about the Garda is happening at the moment, for example, that lively story, what happened a number of years ago but has suddenly become current. What somebody thought was a dead story is a very live story. And maybe sometimes what's likely to happen in the near future. So for example, are we going to have dirty sewage works down near Economy Hospital, and will they boil the view, or will they give odours, or will they infect people, or what will it do to people? That's certainly of concern to people locally here. In the Greater Blanchardstown area, current affairs, then, as I see it, it's about what's happening in the Greater Blanchardstown area, from the Phoenix Park gates up to the Meath border and surrounds. What's happening in the area, or is of direct concern to the local community? They're not necessarily the same thing, because I think we can, allow that people are curious beyond their own picket fence, what's happening in the next district, or even maybe elsewhere. If it hits a spot of curiosity or catches their interest about what's happening in our lives. So, but I think it's also, current affairs are also about giving voice to what people, particularly in local radio and local community radio, about giving voice to what people in our local community have to say, to to one another, to people outside the local area, and what they have to say about the world, our own world here in Blanchetown, Castleknock, etc., and also about the wider world, what we have to say about the wider world, or to the wider world, beyond our own capital. And what's the acid test of authenticity then? What makes something like a good current affairs story? Well, to me, listening to the radio, or looking at TV, wherever it is, or reading the paper, does it sound like this story belongs to Phoenix? Does it belong in Phoenix? Does it resonate? Does it make sense that Phoenix will be telling this story rather than the New York Times or the Times of India or Dunleary Herald or the Cork Examiner or somebody in Ballyfermot or in Sewage? Does it make sense why Phoenix would be covering or following this story? Does it have relevance to this community? And again, I suppose when I thought about it, I thought, well, yeah, that doesn't mean that it has to be happening outside my front door in Dublin 15. But when I go out my front door, maybe it isn't happening, but does it interest me? Am I curious about it? Does it appear to have some meaning for me in my life here in Dublin 15? So the coverage of current affairs then is ultimately about, as I see it, about exploring and searching for the story behind the headlines. And I think we've had a good kick a few times in the last 4 or 5 months that invariably on a Thursday morning we start by going through what's in the local papers, and of course we're probably doing it like the Rosary of old, that somebody else has probably done Northside People 4 times that week. Now we do have a little monopoly on Blanche Gazette because it's a coincidence that it comes out on a Thursday morning. So the first stop on the way to the studio is always the library to catch the Blanche Gazette.
I was wondering how you were getting those.
I'm glad you... Can I change the turn then?
Okay. So the story, because when we look at the Northside People in particular, there have been a number of stories, including about the sewage, because invariably my good friend Deputy Patrick Nulty, well, I think that woman more Laura Webb for him in the Blanche Gazette, I think she's his press agent, because I think he's gone quiet though. She must be on her holidays. Because since last September, since he left the Labour Party, she has had a story every week. Now look at the stories in Northside People or in Blanche Gazette, and it's a one-man, one-voice story. Deputy Nulty is up in arms about this, or whoever. Somebody is up in arms about something, whether it's about your neighbour or what the Conley Hospital gets a terrible time. Whatever is happening, but it's only ever one voice, and it's a very shrill voice. You never see a second voice in the next paragraph. There never isn't a second paragraph that says, but when we talked to so-and-so, they had a different point of view. We've had the pleasure, I think, on the show, a number of those kind of stories, of actually going behind those headlines and looking for more than one point of view. So there's an advantage in scanning for headline research for papers like that, but don't look to them for any serious coverage of anything that's local. The research then, research is about gathering material to reinforce our ideas or give credibility to our story, because really that's what I see we're in the business of. We're about telling the story. Whether we're telling the story to a 3-year-old or a 93-year-old, or we're assisting a 3-year-old or a 93-year-old to tell their story. It's the opposite of spoofing and fillers and useless talk wasting. Because if a story doesn't have the essential ingredients that goes back to Aesop's fables or Celtic fairy tales or Grimm's fairy tales or what you read in the paper or what actually catches your curiosity for information, if it doesn't have the essentials of ingredients of who, what, where and why, then you probably won't have any listeners, or you won't have anybody reading your story or listening to your story. And that goes to the 3-year-old that you're trying to get to settle to bed, or it goes for the 93-year-old who wants to remember the Second World War. People like those ingredients? Who? Who does this story? Who's this story about? What is the story? What about them? Where did it happen? And why did it happen? Why, or particularly in, I suppose, in current affairs, why is it happening at this moment? So why is Alan Shatter spending the last month in the Dáil eating his way out of a paper bag about something that he wasn't there for, he wasn't responsible for? Something that happened years ago, or has been going on for years, long before he was minister. But it's come to the top of whether it's cream or whether it's sour milk, but it's certainly come to the top of the bottle, and it is current now. So those 4 W's, the who, what, where and why, they're core to the research, production and presentation of our story. And I think without them, really, we've nothing to say. We really were wasting listeners' time as well in trying to suggest that we're presenting current affairs. Now some of you will be accustomed to the impolite version of this. In the presence of the Chair Emeritus, I will use the polite version. Poor research equals poor performance based on pathetically poor presentation or preparation. Yes, the 5 P's to be avoided at all costs, and they turn off any audience. Try spoofing, or try wasteful me-I talk to the 3-year-old who really wants that story that you read last night and read 3 nights ago. And yes, I know you're bored reading it, but that's the story they want, and they don't want you giving them some pathetically poor, ill-prepared story. So as volunteers in the community with limited time and resources, how do we go about researching and producing and presenting current affairs of a good standard and that we can stand over? And that's a really big challenge, because obviously we do not have the resources of even modest entities such as the Northside people. How they use them is another matter, but we don't have that. We don't have their advertising revenue, and really that's what all they do have. There are some ingredients, I think, that go to make up how we can go about current affairs. There are, I suppose, first one is personal characteristics. So I sat down here, and Dennis brought over that table, and my eyes lit on this. And I mean, interesting. Nobody said I can't look. Sure, if they did, I would be stupid. So unless I have, a nose on me, unless I'm nosy, unless I'm curious, then I'm not really going to either have an interest in knowing anything more about current affairs, or certainly telling anybody else any story about current affairs. So curiosity is the first thing. Keen observation, or be observing, I suppose, looking around you. Yeah, I'm kind of crossing the street and could end up under a car because really something has caught my eye in the middle distance, about 100 yards away. Taking note of what I see in here, either making a mental note, or if you're very fastidious, journalist, or like the late Maeve Binchy, then you have a little notebook and you listen to people on buses and in cafes, and you write down what they just said. A sense of fairness, I think that's really important. Common sense, buckets of common sense. And attention to potential conflicts of interest. So they would be the personal characteristics that I think are important to thinking about. Oh, I'm going to tell a story about current affairs. Curiosity, keen observation, taking note of what I see and hear around me, a sense of fairness, that really every story has more than one point of view. Common sense, and finally, and I think that's really important in community radio. It's important in every kind of media, but it's certainly very important in community radio, where we are volunteering to research and produce and present radio as a member of our local community to our local community. So what brings us into it, I guess, what brings me into it, is a curiosity and an involvement and an interest in my local community. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have any personal resources to bring to the radio. But on the other hand, oh yeah, that's my tennis club and I want to promote them, and really they're good pals of mine, and I'll bring them on and I put them on 5 days a week. And I never tell anybody, of course, that that was my tennis club. Or I do have a particular involvement in, I'm actually the lead campaigner for No Sewage Works near Connolly Hospital. But I also happen to be presenting D15 today on Phoenix. So, but, oh well, there's a soapbox. I can get to at least 3 listeners out there. So that's not all. We have to watch that more carefully, I suppose, or more intimately in a careful way than I suppose your national or your international journalist does, or even somebody who's working Northside People or Blanche Gazette, who may well be living in Wicklow or working in Wicklow indeed, but just garnering information from here and there. But when we're actually living among our own neighbours, our own families, our own, where our children go to school, where the workplace may be, the organisations we're involved with, that we have to just pay attention to, the very thing that's a resource to us on the one hand, the fact that I know, because I meet people in the pub or the tennis club or the darts club or whatever it is, that gives me lines and gives me stories, but am I free to present that, and can I present it in a fair way, or am I prejudiced towards only presenting one side of the story? They're personal characteristics. Universal characteristics that strike me about it, I suppose, are balance. Wherever you are, you have to have balance. You have to, and 2 or more points of view. There's always 2 or more points of view. There's always more than one side to a story. 3, resources. So what resources do I need to research current affairs? Well, first of all, again, personal. There's nothing more important, I think, than it strikes me, particularly in community radio and current affairs, who do I know? Who I know really does matter. What do I know to be happening? What do I know is happening in this neighbourhood that's really worth telling more people who may not hear about it, or may not hear more than one view of what's happening? Where can I find out what's happening? Why do I think this story would interest the listeners to Phoenix? So there's kind of personal resources, or the kind of internal questions we need to be asking ourselves. Locally, well, there's an inexhaustible list. I mean, most of you will be very familiar with these. But the Phoenix FM website, Phoenix colleagues, whether that be staff or volunteers. Blanchardstown Library is the most important resource. God, I never thought putting, what do you call it, the betel nut. If you want to know anything about anybody, certainly if you want to be the next Maeve Binchy, that is the place to be, because whether it's Councillor Mayor Dennison, or it's the likes of Mr. Connolly, or it's breastfeeding mothers, or anybody you care to think about, you'll meet them in the betel nut. You'll overhear their stories, and you'll certainly get a sense of what's happening in Dublin 15. Schools and the ITB, obviously, the Blanchardstown Area Partnership, churches and faith communities continue to draw a lot of loyalties. They always have newsletters, they always have something that somebody's doing, or somebody's a hero for this, or they don't usually put in the demons, but they certainly put in the heroes. Your workplace, my workplace. So if I'm working locally, I'm in Connolly Hospital, the Blanchardstown Centre, certainly the Blanche Gazette, the Northside People, as I say, certainly to pick up headlines or clues as to who might be worth actually pursuing for a meaningful conversation about what they were giving out about in the last week's paper. And they may have something useful to say, and they may even be glad of an opportunity to say it in a fuller way than simply be quoted as Councillor Blogg said such and such. And of course they may be even interested in having a conversation with somebody with a different point of view. And they won't get that, as I say, in my experience, in those particular papers. The Community Matters website is certainly a very valuable resource for all kinds of happenings and organisations, particularly in Dublin 15. And in fact that it's a website for Dublin 15 is a treasure in itself. Metro Éireann, I suppose the paper that focuses on immigrant stories. We've certainly had I can't pronounce his name just at the moment, but he's the editor, and we've had him on a couple of times about different stories to do with immigrants, and they've certainly quite interesting stories. The Epoch Times, well, I'll tell you about the Epoch Times now in a little minute. Notices on billboards and lampposts. So they're your local resources. Paper and electronic context book. Well, you really have to have a context book. Sure, it's great to have the mobile and to have all the contacts in there, but you know, the paper still matters, because the day happens when you mislay or you lose the phone or whatever, or something goes wrong with the phone and you can't get the contact. So have some kind of notebook that you keep contact. Keep names and contact details. Every guest you have on, that that would be useful for some project or other that you're working on. And it is, well, I'd say a lot more useful than just for Phoenix. The internet, yeah. Great resource obviously, but treat with care, because is the information reliable and can it be checked out? So in other words, you know, is that person still around, or are they contactable, or can you check out, are they for real? Remember, every time I suppose we research, produce, present or manage sound at Phoenix, we are representing ourselves to an audience, and we're also representing our associates at Phoenix. If listeners don't wish to hear poorly prepared stories on public service or commercial radio, why would we imagine they'd want to hear such nonsense locally? So we need to do what we say on the tin. If we're claiming to present a current affairs programme, then we need to make some effort to do that. So I'm going to finish by just drawing attention to a few examples from Thursday's G15 today of stories that we've recently pursued. So I mentioned the Epoch Times. Well, I did say I was nosy, and it's been killing me now for about 2 years at least. I go into Blanche Library and I'm like picking up, and that's of interest to me for all kinds of reasons. You know, when I might take up ballet lessons, so just to have the envelope. So I've been passing the paper, which there's no point in picking that up. It is in Chinese. The only thing that says when you actually search and search and search through the 4 or 5 pages of it, you do eventually find something in English that says Epoch Times. Well, it got the better of me. It was the end of January, first 2 weeks of February, and again we thought, oh, we must do something on our Asian community. We must remember the Chinese, stroke lunar, stroke New Year, stroke Spring Festival. So I actually gathered up the Epoch Times, and I wrote it, and I found, oh, there's a website. And by the way, Epoch Times is very interesting. You can get an English version. Where? On the web. So you can get, and they do have an Irish correspondent. So to mark the Lunar New Year, we had a studio interview with Ms. Liu from the Epoch Times, who is an Irish correspondent, who was very keen. I think freedom and truth. I think in the 10 minutes she was with us, truth was the truth in the news. She repeated endlessly, and basically she was saying Epoch Times gives you the truth. And I think at least twice I said to her, so that would be, in your view, maybe the alternative to what the Chinese government would think. Yes, that's what she meant. Okay. So, the National Children's Hospital then for Connolly. Oh, anybody hear about that? There was an article about 3 weeks ago now, I suppose, in the Sunday Business Post by Susan Mitchell, excellent health correspondent in the Sunday Business Post. And she was basically reporting in an interview she had with James Sheehan of the Blackrock Clinic. He was making a profit out of 2 hospitals in 3, you told me, in Blackrock and Galway and one in America. So I was curious about that story. Well, that's surely a local story. I mean, any possibility of the children's hospital coming anywhere, but certainly if there's any possibility of coming to Blanchardstown, to Connolly, let's go after it, because he's saying he can produce the money and for it. So we pursued, between us, we pursued James Sheehan. We got hold of him after his week in America visiting children's hospitals. We got hold of Jonathan Irwin. Jim contacted Jonathan Irwin of the Jack and Jill Foundation, because he's in partnership with James Sheehan about this project. And I contacted Susan Mitchell as well. Susan Mitchell actually agreed to do a telephone interview last Thursday morning, but I think she got a better call because she cancelled at 8 o'clock in the morning, didn't she, Daniel?
Oh yes.
Daniel was in the Dawn studio on Thursday, or taking a call from Susan Mitchell, saying that she couldn't make it because she had to do an interview for her Sunday paper. But she had a good place to apologise to me by email later. We did get Jim Sheehan, and we did get Jonathan Irwin, and we explored that story last Thursday morning. And that's how we got them. You just have to get the brasso out on your neck and just call Jim.
I think the important thing that you brought up that time was timeliness of the news, of the article and the event, not
Yeah,
going to it too often
yeah.
and then letting it lie for a while. So I think that was the important thing that you were stressing the other day.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so then I have nothing better to do, so I've asked last Monday week would I cover, oh no, last Thursday, 2 weeks, would I cover a lunchtime meeting with the Blanche Travellers Development Group and Oireachtas reps. So in a mad moment I went down there and I waited for an hour while they, their taxi couldn't find the place up in that Northwest Business Park. I sympathise, I couldn't find it myself. Anyway, they brought them around, hadn't used them around for ages, it didn't work. Even though the TDs, one senator, 2 TDs, they were interested in the recording of the proceedings, which was really a dialogue between those two. But out of that, we got 2 interviews with Catherine Joyce of the Blanchetown Travellers Development Group and Paul McLaughlin, who is the rapporteur for the Justice and Equality Committee in the West Oireachtas, who were there to basically to listen to what travellers had to say. And it was very interesting what they did have to say. And it's worth hearing what Catherine Joyce has to say. It's very articulate. The sewage pump, I mentioned that twice, I think already, near Connolly Hospital. A colleague, that's Jim, knew of a protest by Sean Lyons, former councillor, about proximity of this proposal to Connolly Hospital. And we got spokespersons for Fingal County Council, Connolly Hospital and Sean Lyons on the same show to discuss the issues. So we weren't just going to give a platform to Sean Lyons without at least attempting to get the other points of view. And we got them. The referenda, judges pay on Shannon abolition in the autumn. This is an example of keeping your contacts close to you. We got a spokesman from what's his name, Brannock, his first name, from the Referendum Commission to give the factual position, not he wouldn't give opinions, but to give the factual position. And I had his mobile number from previous contacts over 2 previous referenda. And he was actually, I forgot his first name, he was a journalist with the Irish Times. He's now with a big PR firm. So basically he's paid to do PR for the Referendum Commission. Just an example of really that you can get hold of people when you keep them. Jess Jennings, a psychotherapist who comes on a monthly basis from Bray, grew up in the Blanchetown area, but has nothing to gain professionally or financially from coming to Phoenix once a month. But he does a monthly item on mental health. And how did we get in? Well, I knew of him years ago. He used to write for Northside People. Actually, the one interesting column I ever saw on it was that he was writing this mental health column, and it was written in such a common sense and empathic way that I really thought, he's a very interesting guy. And we had to show Miss Sweeney, I think it was, about a year and a half ago. She was a volunteer with us for 6 months on the show. 2 weeks into, I was just talking about, let's get hold of that fella. She said, oh, he's my uncle. She lives in the Navan Road, he lives in Bray. That's how we got hold of him. They're just some examples, I suppose. That's what research is about. It's about who you know, it's about who you don't know, and you have the brass neck to go and ask them. It's about having a bit of cop on and balance, and that really, yes, you have to abide by the rule. Every story has more than one point of view. And Finching. If you were waiting for a PowerPoint and this is Devon now, you'll be waiting. This is Steam Radio presentation. But I can give what they say the best part of a clean copy to Dennis of what I've just said. It's a bit of an interview. And you can certainly. But that's really.
You have a team of 4 or 5 on Thursday. 3. And who do you allocate to do the research, or is it, or who?
Rachel will tell you.
You meet before the program every week, and you.
But basically, the way we have to operate is that you identify the story generally. Muggins gets that's your story and you pursue it.
So if you identify the story, you have to do it.
Unless
We agree to share.
we share it or we get the system.
Sometimes if they're bigger.
But generally speaking.
Okay, do you want to hear the how-to, I suppose? I'll show you, if I can just read it here. We meet once a month regularly, usually the last Friday of the month. And we've, bear with me now.
We would have a gaggle of stories that we
Yes.
might be interested in pursuing,
Yeah,
and then we get overtaken by that
Some-
curiosity
yeah,
at the
so
moment,
we have a
or
list.
something presents itself.
this used to be called the magic envelopes when Colman started this. So
Yes.
since I've produced, I suppose I've dropped it very inadvertently, I suppose. It's just a list now, I'm afraid. So we have at the moment, we have 85 items on it that we have generated between the three of us.
Yeah.
And
Of possible stories.
Possible
That doesn't
stories.
mean that they'll all end up by any means.
yeah,
Now, the 85 would include things that we have actually done.
well, we're
since
talking
last
for the year now,
Yeah,
since last
yeah,
September.
yeah.
So we start and we have a number of regular items that we do every week. We do our news items, so you go through the Blanche, what do you call the Met and the
Yeah.
Gazette.
Yeah.
And then we have other things that we do monthly, the likes of the Voices series. We have the Citizens Information Centre has a monthly slot. We have Garda Síochána has a monthly slot. And am I missing anybody else? I am. Hold on, I can tell you. Dreacht has a monthly
Dreacht, yeah.
spot.
And
Jess Jennings has
and
a
when
monthly.
you're around for a little while people move on, so you get to inherit. So we inherited Dreacht when Donald stopped doing his art show. We were madly concerned that Dreacht would get a regular outing because it's such a resource. We inherited, I think, community information from Tony Robinson was stopping doing it on during D15 today. And so I think it is a bit current affairs. Yeah, the research and presentation and development of current affairs is a stone that gathers moss. I know when I started 2.5 years ago, you're scratching the earth just to get something. But it is only when you gather moss and you get used to people saying, no, I won't do it, I'll never do it, or I can't do it today, but I'll do it another time, or you rake through your own personal knowledge or contacts, or you just...
Well, I would say that actually a synergy is created between the three of us.
Yeah.
That, first of all, the programme's not all down to one person,
No.
so we have all come across with various ideas.
Yeah.
And so we're very happy with this list because while it's not exhaustive, if we come up with something different, something new, we'll add it to the list. We may do something on it if it's timely and opportune and say, look, if we have this for, because sometimes things drop off as well. You can be left with having preparation done, but something doesn't materialise for various reasons on a particular day. So then we take the individual responsibility to put something in instead. So that's how. So I think we're in our second year now working together, and so we each are confident that each other delivers what we say we're delivering.
Sounds very comfortable, Colman. I was interested in your comments about fairness, balance and conflict of interest. Have you ever had a row among the three comfortable, friendly people about, lack of balance or lack of fairness, or you're pushing that item too much, or a particular party?
Be honest.
Absolutely, but not by a party in the sense of a political party, no. We certainly, but on the other hand, if you do know a certain politician, then they're going to be more accessible.
Yeah.
So certainly I went through a phase of getting more interviews with same Deputy Nulty, because I haven't known personally, than I might have. It took a year I think to get an interview with Leo Bradford. When we were just shopping around to interview the local TDs that were. I think it took nearly a year to get an interview with Joe Higgins, because these important people, they're vicars on earth, don't actually near them, but they're fine when you do get hold of them. But we've had all the other
So will we answer the question, please?
the conflict of interest. But that's asking about the political. That's what asking about the important part of the political one. Yeah, we would have rows about all kinds of things.
We do, do, and we're still talking to each other.
Yeah. And
Because-
conflicts of interest do come up, we do have to say to one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be honest that because of my position at County Hospital as a patient counsel, whenever we do something, we have to, I usually turn it over to Colman or to agency to the interview, so there's no, all very conflict of interest.
Because Jim has to be the chair of the Patients' Council and conflict, so that wouldn't really, but that would undermine the position there. Would also undermine.
That's an example of where we
Yeah.
were watching the conflict.
But just on that point, just to follow on from that, I mean, you know, do you ever have any adverse reaction to something that you've done or said? Or another part of that is community radio, by its nature, as you say, is about the community and keeping people informed and obviously keeping them involved, that you're a bit wary of maybe rubbing people up the wrong way. That you might be thinking something, but you kind of thought, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe not go down that road, because we all have to live in the community, and maybe, as you say, the next week's program or somewhere down the line, you might want to talk to these people, or vice versa again, you know. That you don't have that luxury sometimes of maybe cutting loose. Leaving aside the rules of libel, but you know what I'm saying, like that.
The only,
I'm going to finish
the only
with one.
experience I've had one
Yeah,
experience,
okay.
and that was, I think it was about, what let me see now, must be a year and a half ago, must be, well, no, 2 years ago now, 2 years ago. We did a little series at the beginning of 2012 on School Around the Corner. And we wrote to all the primary schools, which are 30, probably 35 now, in the area, and saying, you know, that would be interested in visiting their school, meeting the principal, a teacher, one teacher, and a number of children, simply to talk about their school and what was important to their school. And we did that. We got a response from about 10 schools, and we had a negative experience in one school, reported to us by the good Capuchin of Phoenix, who had business in a very non-denominational school. Not one of the ones you're thinking of now, but a non-denominational community something or other anyway. But the principal there had took grave exception to an interview I had with a 8-year-old little girl, I think she was an African-born girl, and she brought up something about God or about Jesus or something like this. So, this is, I then pursued this with a question. And that principal was, I gathered, never complained to me or to Phoenix, but she certainly complained to Denver that he told the station that she was very put out how undenominational, non-denominational, and atheistic, or whatever it was, they prided themselves in that school that religion did not get mentioned. And that's the only experience of it.
Yeah.
But that was so ridiculous. The only thing that wasn't ridiculous about it was I did see evidence of a written complaint she had made. We were in good company. She had written to BAI about RTE, who had visited to make a television programme. And she really had gone to the Broadcasting Complaints Authority. And so, but I would love to have if she'd complained, because my answer to her would be, this is current affair. Come on the radio and we'll discuss this item, and we'll get a little panel of 3 other people and see what their opinions are.
Yeah.
That's the only experience I prefer. Did you guys have that experience? Or did you hear at that experience?
Yeah. I don't know though, it's just on the issues like, and Jim, you know, the Conley Hospital, like, and all the issues about healthcare and all that. There was an item there, we touched on it there, about the satellite children's hospitals that are going to be set up prior to the new hospital being built. And I was talking to somebody on the show, and it was made a very good point. It was all a good news story, and it's so rightly so, like, and there's no harm in getting those. But then she just brought up the point: will the children have to go through the mainstream casualty to access the children's hospital? And I thought that's a very good point. It was never thought of.
Yeah.
That, you know, the last thing you want if you have a sick child is to go into the mainstream casualty. But again, you know, if you pursue that, like, there could be people could come back and say, you know, you're making a very good news story sound bad, or you're pushing the you know, the limits on it, like, you know, with the powers that be. So, and we didn't pursue it on the day, like, but it stuck in my mind that later on.
Why would that cause
Definitely.
difficulty?
Well, I suppose it doesn't on the face of it, like, but I just felt I didn't want to go there that day.
Okay.
You know.
Well, we certainly had the manager of Colman Duggan 2 Januaries in a row, I think, about their budget, because there was at least 2 Januaries since 2011 that they were coming in with, they were in fact, because they got over budget each time.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't do it at the beginning of January, but she certainly readily came on at the end of January and talked to her budget, talked to her deficit, and any reasonable question was entertained. I think you can ask anything.
Oh, I know. Well, that wouldn't stop me, but as you say, like that.
Especially an opinion about it would be a different story.
But if you can, you know, if you're being too negative in some people's eyes, then they might shy away the next time coming back to you so readily. You know, there's a balance that.
See, I think on the flip side of that, there might be something then sometime in the future that they might want to plug. They say, "Oh, look, we've done something positive," and
Come back to.
yeah, exactly.
I don't
Like
think overall.
politicians, they'll always come back when they have something to.
Overall, you need to look at it. Yeah, they're going to come back like a boomerang, because we're, you know, at election time they're going to come to us like flies on the proverbial. You know, that's just going to happen the whole time. Overall, we're pretty much overwhelmingly positive generally as a station. Community radio generally is quite positive. So when we have someone, I don't think that question specifically. I don't think they'll take offence to that. Like, I mean, a lot of the time press releases are put out, and I suppose something we have to look at is to not swallow them entirely and just.
Oh, I know, yeah.
They say,
yeah.
you know, I'm not saying talking about you specifically. I'm talking about in general. We need to look at them more critically. That they say headline positive move or something, that we don't just swallow that like a big PR line. That we actually look behind it and see, is it actually a positive? Do the community agree that that's a positive? But still putting it out there in an unbiased format. I'm not saying, like, we had the code of fairness, fairness, objectivity and impartiality from the BAI recently. We had the session here in summer, I think it was. You know, a large part of that is just, once we tackle it fairly, once we're not seen to be going for the jugular, you know, we're not going to be, you know, one of the big presenters like George Hook or someone, or Vincent Brown with a bee in their bonnet and go for the jugular every time just because it makes great television. We're out there to actually get an answer. So once we deal with it fairly, objectively and impartially, we're fine, I think.
Yeah, what I'd be all for, like, if you had somebody on, as you say, like, initially, like, it's a good news story, like, I think you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Later on then, as Dan was saying, like, if it turns out that the promises weren't carried through, like, I think by all means then, you know, as you say, bring them back and say, by the way, you were here, you know, six months ago, we were going on very positive, and now.
I think that's an important thing to remember. What I would say as well is, the rule of thumb that I would generally use if I remember doing a program or anything is that if you were sitting there and a question strikes you, if you were at home, you'd be screaming at the radio for them to ask that question. So if you were thinking that question, you can be guaranteed someone that's listening will be thinking as well. So while I would say, yeah, you don't want to be wholly negative on a positive story at all, but if there's a question really jumping at you, I would try to put it forward if you can, without being negative about it, but just to shed more light on it, because if it is something they haven't dealt with in the press release or whatever they've said to you, it is an issue, you know, because I think in Ireland a lot of the time we do accept things straight off, and then 2 years down the line we're morally outraged, but no one actually asked the question at the time. So, you know, maybe if we probed a little bit harder when we had the chance, you know, we might have exposed something then, but that's not to be negative either, do you know what I mean? So it's, overall we're quite positive though, I think.
Colman, interesting about the Epoch Times, you know what's called that, but I've seen these Chinese.
Well, you wouldn't from Dublin for radio, unless your Mandarin is very good.
So, I mean, because they have them in all the supermarkets now, is there a big Chinese population, and does your team follow up that particular team on a regular basis?
Oh, we're hiring.
Chinese takeaway.
No, I mean, basically it comes our interest, and we'd add it to our repertoire now that we see that, first of all, you can look up the Epoch Times and get it in English. Secondly, I did point out to the lady when I was talking to her, you know, very interesting, you have an Irish edition, but on your website, the last story was last April of Irish story. So I don't know if I'm feeding that story every day of the week. The Metro Ireland, I think, is more interesting because it's they are very rooted here, and they are. I suppose they do local. They do stories that are of interest to Irish-born white people. They do a lot of stories that are of interest, certainly to African and particularly Nigerians, but the Arab Nigerian. But they also, they do try to actually do stories that are real here. And this is Roy Doyle writing for them as well. But I think it's not that you have to have all these people on all the time. I think they're useful though to have it on one's contact list. And certainly if you're quoting from some of these papers, I think it behoves us to at least check out, do they have a story or something behind it.
Just like last year, we had the gentleman who owned the restaurant here in the centre, and it was actually interesting that we had that they really don't call it a New Year's, they call it a Spring Festival. So it was something we have been sensitive to bringing that into.
Just on that point, difficulty sometimes of getting stories in, like putting the word out. I mean, have you found now, like since your involvement, that people are aware that you're involved in the station and the program that you do, and people will come to you? Because I think that myself, that can be it's a big problem. That it's not that you won't want to say, look at me and who I am, but that if people are aware like that feed in stuff to you, like maybe, or items of interest that either they want to get or in general.
No, I keep hoping for the call from Sergeant McKay, but I think I'm the only one in the country he hasn't got. No, I haven't.
Yeah.
What I have found is that maybe people that that we or one of us had interviewed a few months ago, you might meet them in the street and they'll say, I was listening to so-and-so, that was very interesting last week or whatever. So it's, I suppose, only
Get feedback. I find I subscribe to newsletters and information bulletins and things like that, so that gives me a bit of prompting sometimes too for subjects that I think would be interesting.
I mean, it is researching current affairs is literally doing that in Phoenix. As in my experience, there isn't. I mean, you go back to your controversy. I would love it if somebody was on to Dennis McAvoy, burning the phone, saying, "Jesus, what were they on about yesterday morning?" Because that surely would be worth putting in the Times of India. Phoenix has made it. Somebody out there is listening. They feel strongly enough about it to be complaining or getting excited or having say they want to come on next week and give their story. No, we don't tend to not setting out to annoy people. But we don't get shows that well. The early morning sure gets calls and texts, but we don't.
Yeah, there's an interesting
I think
one example.
text a few times.
Yeah. Well, one example we had was that we interviewed a couple that had actually gone out to Madagascar to do some voluntary work. And a guy in Sackville Street in Dublin was listening on his radio and he heard it. And he approached them, he phoned them up and recommended that they apply for a media grant to actually go out to Madagascar the next time. And so that came out, yeah.
Here, never mind that. When are we going to Madagascar? The media grant. We'll cover the story.
Well, we will be covering the story because part of his getting the grant was his undertaking to come back and so we hope to be interviewing him from the top of a mountain in Madagascar in the middle of his work there.
Well, going back to the curiosity at the moment, certainly my personal sense is you do have to rely on your own sense of curiosity. There isn't 3,000 listeners that I'm aware of saying enough of the Labour Party and what they're up to about the sewage tank that's going to be down in Connolly. We want to hear something else. No, I'd love to we don't get that kind of feedback, do we? So it is following and you have to rely. I've given up on thinking about is there an audience out there? I just think, well, yeah, it's like if this interests me, maybe it interests some people out there.
We get feedback, but I think your curiosity is a big part of it, and I think an interest in people. And as you say, sometimes you'll be talking to somebody and the back of your head is then going, this is a good story, we can ask them. But a lot of people can be reluctant as well, the idea of actually speaking on that.
Just to say as well on the listenership, I know every time this comes up I have the said answer, but I'm going to keep stabbing at it until someone listens to me. The Red Sea poll, a year and a half ago, Community Radio 34% listened yesterday and 22%, or 22% listened yesterday and 34% in the last week. So you can use those figures as you like. If they're higher or lower for urban areas, you know, they may well be slightly lower, but it still indicates an audience. The other thing is, since I've last given this answer, if we're ever off air, if there's ever a technical problem, I will get calls from not only board and staff and other people and volunteers, but I'll also get calls from people saying, do you know you're off air? They're not linked to us whatsoever. So there are people listening out there. They might be listening for niche shows or shows that are interested, but look, that's the nature of community radio. We're going to be tilting against windmill, or what's that phrase? Windmills? Or
Windmills.
Is it windmills?
Tilting windmills, yeah.
Tilting against windmills. If we're trying to, you know, we can't be preoccupied with this. We're here for the good of our own community.
You don't think about that.
And we do that. But like, I mean, look, I mean, the radio stations, as I say, the text response to most radio stations is minimal. RTE would have a fairly good response to it, okay? But they're a national broadcaster. They've got millions behind them. They've got a massive staff. They can coax that out. Joe Duffy, you know, they go and ring people. You know, if it's quite day, they'll ring people to come on. Phone shows, Adrian, whatever his name is, and the rest of them. They'll ring people to get up a conversation going. You know, so I'm not saying we advocate go and ring people, get them angry and get them on air, but you know, they struggle hard for this, and they've got thousands of euro behind it to make it look like they've got a fantastic listenership and great texts and everything else.
I can actually vouch to that, because many years ago was on Marion Finucane about an issue, and a year later I got a phone call nearly half an hour before the show started, and it said, you were on with us a year ago, and we're bringing this issue up again, would you be interested in coming back on there? And I said no, but it just proved the point. I wasn't forgotten.
No. It also proves another point, though.
Keep
What
your
Paul was
contact
saying
book.
earlier is, you know, if you've interviewed someone, you keep that person, keep the contact
keep it
details, and
forever.
come back to them.
Huh?
It
Keep
proves
the
another
contact
point.
forever.
Oh yeah, I do, yeah.
So no, it just proves their point as well. That's what they have to do as well as us.
Yeah.
But,
Can I just say that
I
thing?
was going to make that very same point and elaborate on what Dennis said there. Like, I mean, from my perspective, like I work in the commercial industry, and you know, we could have like €5,000 to give away in the next hour, and you know, the text board would not be lighting up under any, like you'd get a few people texting in, oh yeah, I'm on 5,000 quid, but it's not as you know, the presenters will say, oh yeah, our text lines are, you know, they're lighting up and the computer's about to blow up. It's not that case at all. So I mean, you shouldn't really you know, I've been here long enough, you shouldn't really take the kind of the not getting texts or calls to heart bit, because it very rarely happens frequently in any other.
I just put it in context. I like the two of you guys, when I moved on from thinking about is there a listener out there or not. I presume there is. But all I'm saying is we don't get feedback about stories or prompts or feeds of stories. You don't get that kind of live response. But maybe in time Phoenix will, you know, because they're still a real youngster, certainly in daytime radio.
Yeah, well, I think that's what he's thinking on. Like, I think now between this and next May, like if you put out a story and involves politicians, you probably will get, you know, pro side, one side. I think of an issue that's coming up fast and furious is the Porterstown Gate issue, and that one they've already thrown stones already between Leo and a few other individuals, and I actually looked into that about this letter we sent out for the incursion to influence the councillors, like, and it doesn't appear to what it was in the statement at all.
Just on that, we've had put it on 2 or 3 occasions.
Yeah.
What we're hearing now is the domino effect of Colman and Castleknock.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. That's all coming down the line, literally.
So
Years to come, yeah.
it was the
David
application.
McGuinness is actually very eager to talk about that. Fianna Fáil councillor.
There you go. We can
Yeah.
make contact.
David McGuinness, the Fianna Fáil councillor, he's been quite vocal about it.
Well, Roderick Greene, whatever we call him, he was in
Roger Gorman.
so he was in the Gazette where the Northside people were
Please counteract that. Leo.
accusing Bradcar, saying
Yeah.
That recorder's off, right?
Yeah. No, but it's true. Now you're generating a story, because now it's and now you've got, let's say, David McGuinness. So it's starting. That's the one.
If one also had the research assistants who would listen to old interviews, I think it was summer autumn of 2011, we interviewed as many councillors for this area as we could get. Some of them were choice, and then some of them just weren't unavailable. It would be interesting to play a clip of some of what they had to say back in 2011. And now, councillor, you're going up for re-election in 2014. So what have you done about that? So
That means start finding some.
Was that, yeah, it did start fine. Well, I think this is relevant to it anyway,
Yes.
so we've started already. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. There's tea and coffee and stuff here and a few biscuits if you want to have a chat afterwards. I'll thank Colman again for that. We're going to adjourn upstairs to talk about the election, so if there is anyone involved or interested in covering the local and European elections, we'll be having that chat upstairs in that planning meeting. But thanks again, Colman.
Thank you.